Hi, and welcome to the IT'd Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 132. What can Monster Cable Company teach us about operating systems? So, Monster Cable Company, not to be confused with Monster Energy drinks, where Monster Energy drinks create horrible tasting energy drinks that'll probably kill you. Horrible is probably a subjective term. I don't know. But anyway, energy drinks that'll probably kill you. Whereas Monster Cable, they create high quality, very expensive products that are of, like I said, they're good quality. And if you've ever picked up a Monster Cable, you'll probably notice it's got some heft to it. It's really decently made. Honestly, Monster Cables are really good for preventing crimping and really any sort of like loss due to a hard bend or things like that. Also cuts, excellent cuts and things like that. They're really good for that. And Monster Cable is really kind of I don't know. In the early 2000s, one of my first careers was in refurbishment, and I had to do a lot of work with Monster products, mainly because, people would buy them, realize that they were so expensive and not really get what they were looking for with Monster cables, because it was a thing where Monster was like, it was a whole thing that Monster cables would improve audio quality. It would improve viewability. Their product would just improve your overall experience with your audio video equipment. And so it was a whole thing. Now, that being said, the other aspect of Monster Cable is that one of their other things is that they said their stuff was gold plated, and that made a difference. Which is to say that it's cool. You got gold plated stuff, and if that matters to you, if you're a rich asshole, maybe having gold plated everything really does matter. But honestly, from a technical standpoint, they did a study. In the early 2000s, late 2000s, where they took a coat hanger, used a coat hanger to drive speakers, and then used Monster cables to drive speakers, and there was no difference. Like, audiophiles couldn't tell the difference. Electronically, there wasn't any difference. The signal, there wasn't any difference. There wasn't any difference. In the audio spectrum, nothing. There was no difference whatsoever, and it's because audio. That's how audio works, right? Like, there's not really a whole lot there for you to really improve on, as long as the signal is getting where it's supposed to go. Resistance and capacitance, all of that doesn't really matter when you're sending a simple audio signal across a cable. At least that's the way it's explained in the study. Anyway, this whole idea that Monster cables really, they were going to improve your audio, your audio experience, your listening experience, because you had these much more expensive cables, was essentially bullshit. Now, to be fair to Monster, they never claimed that their stuff was superior as far as the changing the way that you listen to music. They always were like, our cables are high quality, so on and so forth. If you buy one of their products, all I have to say is that I worked on a lot of Monster products, aside from cables. I worked on a lot of Monster products when I was doing refurbishment, and that might tell you something. I'm not going to go out and say it out loud. You can come to your own conclusion there. Anyway, the whole point being is that Monster Cable Company really, they touted their stuff as being necessary for audiophiles. And I don't know, you could make an argument that if you wanted to just have a name brand and not just buy stuff from Radio Shack and whatnot and have Radio Shack branded stuff, man, I'm dating myself again. But if you wanted to have something that was name brand that you could lean against as like, this is the Nike of of audio listening or whatever, Monster Cable could do that for you. But that's really all it was doing. Now, when we're talking about operating systems, we've gotten to a point where we can kind of say that about Microsoft as well. Now, I'm not going to claim that Microsoft's product, Microsoft Windows, is not the best operating system out there for the general public, because honestly, in an enterprise environment, the level of management and feature capability that is exposed for users and administrators alike, really, Microsoft Windows can't be matched. Like, there's already prepped controls and everything for Microsoft Windows to be managed by enterprise environment. But with that being said, it is expensive. It is horribly expensive. And there are a lot of reasons that you might not want to have Windows operating systems, aside from the fact that it is expensive, but also it's part of Microsoft's ecosystem. If you have moral objections to Microsoft for whatever reason, you might not want to pay them. But then what are your other options? Like, it's very difficult. I refuse and refute. I will fight you, Apple. If you tell me that Mac products are meant for enterprise environment, because they are not. Enterprise environment allows for centralized control and management of computer systems, along with the ability to make the experience non-user driven, and that is not Apple. Apple requires that the user be in control of the device at all times, which is not enterprise. That is not enterprise environment. That is a personal device, and fuck you if you say any different. Hate Apple. God damn it. Get all the Macs out of your enterprise. They are perfect personal devices because they just fucking work. But when you're trying to manage them in an enterprise environment, in an enterprise scope, they just suck ass. Man, I went off on a tangent. Fuck Apple. Anyway, so your other option for operating systems when you're talking about an enterprise environment is Ubuntu. And we have gotten kind of to the point where it is viable for organizations to move over to a Linux or Ubuntu environment. I should say Linux and not Ubuntu, because Ubuntu is a specific flavor of Linux. It's a Debian flavor of Linux. But the reason why I say Ubuntu instead of any other Linux flavor or just Linux at large is that Ubuntu is actually supported by the vast majority of enterprise management organizations. And we are seeing a switch right now, as of 2026. We are seeing a switch across a lot of organizations into this new realm of Linux native devices. A few years ago, when Microsoft announced that Windows 10 would no longer be supported and that everybody had to move over to Windows 11, the German government, the government of Germany, decided that they didn't want to pay Microsoft any more money to have an operating system that only lasted 7 years, which you can't blame them for because it's kind of fucking bullshit. But the German government was like, okay, well, what are our options? And so they decided they were going to roll over to a Linux native platform. And so they made the switch, and all of their systems are now Linux native. They don't really have any Microsoft operating systems in their environment. They probably still use Microsoft products, but they are looking to switch away from that and move over to alternatives to Microsoft products as well. And it's possible. It really is possible to do this with a lot of what's given now. Now, if you don't want to move all the way over into Linux or open source products or full Microsoft alternatives to things, such as like you still want to use Office 365 for your email and whatnot, that's totally possible as well. Because the good news is that, and one of the reasons why I bring up Ubuntu is that Ubuntu actually has a management extension for things like Intune. So in an enterprise environment, you can still manage Ubuntu Ubuntu systems through Intune in Microsoft 365, which allows you to then still have that full device control and actually remain compliant if you require that for your organization. We've also seen France move over to Microsoft or to Linux native devices as well. We're seeing this push more and more, and it's getting to the point where this is something that is possible. You no longer are beholden to a single organization to provide your operating system. Now, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to make this switch? How is it possible? Well, again, just like with the Monster Cable thing, Microsoft's products are expensive. They are horribly expensive. They can add anywhere from 5% to 25% of the cost of a computer system to your computer. So when you're ordering a new computer, when you have to order a system, if you put an operating system on there, it can add a significant chunk of the cost to that device. On top of that, Microsoft likes to change their licensing platform, not irregular. Not on an. They just like to change their licensing platform. They've done it at least 3 times in the last 5 years. Now, that's not to say that it completely changes the game, but it does make things more expensive and make things unpredictable for an organization. And if you're trying to do long-term planning, especially for something as large as like the German government, you want consistency. You don't want to have to make these changes and plan on these changes every fucking year, every fucking 3 years, because it becomes very hard to manage. So some of the other reasons that you might want to move over are that Microsoft now, because it is so large, it is making a lot of difficult decisions that are impacting experience by users, such as they are implementing AI natively into their operating system, which is adding performance cost. It's reducing user experience, and it is impacting the ability for people to actually do their jobs. Now, that's not a total aspect killer. That's not a total killer of the operating system, but it does impact the overall experience. It's just another thing to go on top of the pile. And then alternatively, everything that Microsoft is offering, there are becoming more and more feature-rich and fully supported alternatives to these applications, to their operating systems, to everything that they're offering, so that it may or may not be an actual like horribly difficult thing to switch away from it. Just like with Monster Cable, you have all of these different cable types, and Monster actually made it easy to have some very nice speaker cables, such as they pre-clipped them with banana clips so that you could quickly plug them in, and that you could quickly attach speakers and whatnot. They made some of these things happen for their speakers, but now everybody else has kind of gotten into the game, and there are actually a lot of other companies that make these other speaker ends that work just as well, or that work extremely quickly, or whatever. Anyway, the point is that there are other people doing these things that make it so that they aren't the only game in town. They're not the only offering for that particular type of system. So if my point with this whole episode is that if you are looking at Microsoft and you're looking at your computers that you have to have for your business or organization, and you are thinking, man, we're spending a lot of money replacing computers because Microsoft dictates that we need new computers for this operating system, or you're spending a lot of money on Windows or Microsoft, and you're like, man, this is really getting expensive. I don't know if I can afford this. I don't know if I can remain solvent if I have to continue to replace my computer systems. If I don't know if this is going to be possible. Then maybe looking at a solution like Ubuntu is an option for you, especially if you can get some assistance with that. And becoming comfortable with the operating system is no longer a huge task, because what are some of the things that what are some of the limitations that prevented you from moving over to Ubuntu or Linux in the past? Well, the applications weren't supported in that platform. That we didn't have the ability to do certain things in those platforms. QuickBooks didn't run on Linux. My lead generation system didn't work on Linux. But now the vast majority of those products, of those softwares, are actually offered up as platforms on the internet. And so accessing them through the internet is actually it doesn't matter which operating system you're coming from. That's just there. And you can go into it and log into it and have the same experience on a Linux device as you do on a Windows device. So, a lot of the difficulty curve has been removed. So those are some things that have been that get resolved just by the nature of everybody moving to the cloud and software is becoming less about having a client on your machine and more about accessing it from the internet. But also, the vast majority of softwares are now supported on Linux, and there are more and more getting there every day as this becomes a more frequent occurrence for people who are switching over to a Linux-based operating system. More people, more organizations are building Linux native clients themselves. So this may be a thing that is possible for your organization now today to get away from Microsoft, if you so choose. Again, I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but if you're a business who is struggling and looking to save money anywhere, any way they can, this might be one of those reasons. Now, I'm going to release another episode eventually talking about hardware lifecycle changes. But another thing that Linux allows you to do, making this switch, is that it allows you to extend the life of your computer. Because one of the problems with things like Microsoft Windows is that as the operating system ages, and as they add more and more fixes, more and more features, more and more base functions to the operating system, it slows that system down. And so installing the same operating system on a computer and then installing that same operating system 5 years later on that same computer, there's going to be massively different experiences with performance and with usability on that system because the operating system itself has grown, whereas the hardware on the device has stayed static. And so these are problems that you don't necessarily run into with Linux-based operating systems, is that they run lean and mean. They run well on very limited hardware, which is why, in my previous episodes about Linux and operating systems, said Linux runs on everything. Because it fucking does. That's one of its main features, is that it runs leaner on systems, and so you get better performance, you get better usability, and the gap is being closed on the user experience. There are even skins that you can add to Linux GUIs to make them even appear like a Windows operating system. You can make it appear like a Mac if you really want to. These are things that you can absolutely do and lower the change curve for your users, but in order to switch over to Linux instead of having a Windows operating system. Now, again, I'm not advocating that everybody get rid of Windows. Windows, like I said, it does a lot. It's kind of the gold standard for enterprise management because the feature set there is there for both administrators and users. On Linux, not so much. You still do have to kind of be a little bit more of an expert for management of systems in order to use Linux in an enterprise environment. But you can make the jump. There are ways to do it. It's becoming easier and easier to manage. And like I said before, there are tools that are getting there to help you, like Microsoft Intune being rolled out for Linux devices so that you can centrally manage those devices in another way. Now, the ultimate thing here is that, like Monster, Windows operating systems cost a lot of money. I've said that more than a few times in this podcast. But is it really adding anything to your organization? Is it adding anything that you can't get by maybe going a different route? Like I said, Monster made their cables simple and easy to use. You didn't have to cut your own cables with Monster. You could buy your predefined links. Other companies did this as well, but Monster really had the higher quality. They felt better. They really were a cable system that made sense. And yeah, that was really good. But now, that might not be very important to you, just like Microsoft's management platform, Microsoft's offerings might not be important to you either. And so there is an alternative. And that's really the core of this. I want all business owners, I want all small business owners and everybody who might be working through enough of a struggle with making ends meet within their business, and give them an opportunity to be able to switch over to something that can save them money. You don't have to spend the extra $1,000 buying a new computer. You could theoretically roll over to a Linux machine, and even if you have to buy new hardware, you can make it cheaper by not having to buy that Microsoft license. You can install Linux on there yourself, and you can figure that out. I definitely suggest looking at tools like Balena Etcher or Rufus to mount and install ISOs onto thumb drives so that you can deploy your operating systems appropriately. And there are other applications out there that will allow you to customize your Linux image, or you can just download the straight vanilla image from the operating system creators themselves. Canonical makes Ubuntu. If you decide to go a different route with your Linux operating systems, there's a lot of different flavors out there, and they all have different things that they provide, and different levels of usability and support. And so it is just a hazard. Hey, if you're going to go off on your own, just make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you know where you're going, and make sure that you know that certain things may not be possible on your distribution of Linux. So all that being said, again, if you are a small business, if you are somebody who is looking to maybe save a little money, maybe get out from underneath Microsoft's boot, maybe get away from Microsoft's updating practices or their licensing practices or whatever, switching over to Linux is a possibility for you. And it's a possibility the entire way up and down your stack. So if you even if you have a server that's Microsoft Windows, it's possible to switch away from that. Even if you have, Office 365, it's possible to switch away from that. I'm not advocating that as a necessity, but if you really need to save money, there are ways to do this in an intelligent manner that can save you money, put you more in control, and make you less reliant and affected by Microsoft themselves. And I think that's all I have time for today, guys, because if I say much more, I'll probably be sued if I'm not already. Haha. Have a great day.